Thomas Sankara was just 37 years old when he was assassinated. 4 bullets ended his life, but they could not end his vision. More than 3 decades later, his name still inspires millions across Africa. As president of Burkina Faso from 1983 to 1987, Sankara transformed his country in ways many thought were impossible. He rejected foreign aid, built schools and hospitals, empowered women, and made Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food production, all in just 4 years. But his revolution had enemies. On October 15, 1987, his closest ally, Blaise Compaoré, betrayed him in a coup. Backed by powerful forces that feared Sankara's ideas, Compaoré took control, reversing everything Sankara had built. Yet Sankara's story did not end that day. His legacy is alive, not just in history, but in the people of Burkina Faso today. His vision of an independent, self-reliant Africa continues to shape new leaders like Captain Ibrahim Traoré, who now leads Burkina Faso in a renewed fight against neo-colonialism. This is the story of Thomas Sankara, his rise, his impact, his assassination, and how his dream refuses to die. Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. To understand why Thomas Sankara became such a powerful figure in African history, we need to know his humble beginnings. He was not born into wealth, nor was he destined for leadership in a traditional sense. His rise was not one of privilege, but of sheer determination, intellect, and an unshakable belief in a different future for Africa. Thomas Isidore Noel Sankara was born on December 21, 1949 in Yako, Upper Volta, now Burkina Faso. His father was a former soldier in the French colonial army, and his mother was a devout Catholic. His family was neither rich nor politically connected. They lived an ordinary life, shaped by the realities of a country still under French influence. From a young age, Sankara was intelligent, disciplined, and deeply observant. His parents wanted him to become a priest, believing that a religious path would secure a stable future for him. But young Thomas had different plans. He saw the inequalities in his country, the vast gap between the ruling elite and ordinary people. He wanted change, and he believed the military was the best way to achieve it. At the age of 19, Sankara joined the National Military Academy of Ansirabe in Madagascar. This was a pivotal moment in his life. It was here that he was first introduced to leftist ideologies: Marxism, anti-imperialism, and Pan-Africanism. He studied the revolutionary movements that had transformed nations, from Fidel Castro's Cuba to China under Mao Zedong. More importantly, Sankara saw how countries could resist Western influence and build their futures. He began questioning the power structures that kept Africa dependent on foreign aid and Western control. After completing his military training, Sankara returned to Upper Volta and quickly gained a reputation as a brilliant strategist and a soldier with strong political views. Unlike many military officers who focused solely on warfare, he was deeply concerned about social justice, education, and economic independence. By the late 1970s, he had risen to prominence within the army. He was outspoken, charismatic, and unafraid to challenge authority. This made him both admired and feared. The ruling government saw him as a threat because he spoke openly against corruption, foreign dependency, and the suffering of ordinary people. In 1981, he was appointed Minister of Information under President Saye Zerbo. But he did not use the position to simply echo government propaganda. Instead, he criticized the government's failures and called for transparency. His speeches resonated with the people, but made the ruling elite uneasy. Sankara's time in government did not last long. He resigned in 1982, famously saying, "A soldier without political education is a potential criminal." This statement reflected his belief that the military should serve the people, not oppress them. By 1983, Upper Volta was in crisis. The economy was failing, and foreign powers, particularly France, still had enormous control over the country's resources and policies. The people were growing restless. They wanted change, and they saw a leader in Sankara. That year, he was appointed prime minister under President Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo. This was a strategic move by the government, hoping to keep Sankara in check by giving him a position of power. But Sankara was not someone who could be controlled. As prime minister, he intensified his calls for self-reliance, economic independence, and anti-imperialism. He openly criticized the presence of French influence in Upper Volta, stating that Africa needed to control its destiny. This made many powerful people uneasy. Within months, Sankara was arrested and placed under house arrest. The government thought removing him from public view would silence him. It did the opposite. His arrest sparked outrage, particularly among young soldiers and revolutionary thinkers. On August 4, 1983, a group of military officers led by Blaise Compaoré organized a coup and freed Sankara. That same day, he was declared president of Upper Volta. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. One of his first acts? Renaming the country. Upper Volta was a name given by French colonizers. It meant nothing to the people. Sankara changed it to Burkina Faso, land of upright people. This was more than just a symbolic change. It was a statement. Burkina Faso was no longer a colony, and its people would stand tall. What made Thomas Sankara different from other African leaders of his time? He was not interested in power for its own sake. Unlike many post-colonial rulers who enriched themselves, he lived modestly. He sold the government's fleet of luxury cars and replaced them with simple Renault 5s, the cheapest car in Burkina Faso at the time. He refused to have a presidential salary higher than that of an average soldier. He banned government officials from flying first class. He lived in a simple house, owned no private wealth, and often rode a bicycle through the capital. He saw himself not as a ruler, but as a servant of the people. Sankara's presidency was not just about policies. It was about changing mindsets. He told the people of Burkina Faso that they did not need foreign aid to survive. They did not need to beg the West for help. They had the power to rebuild their nation. For the first time, Burkina Faso had a leader who genuinely believed in the potential of his people. But his radical approach had consequences. The world was watching. His ideas were spreading beyond Burkina Faso, and powerful forces, both inside and outside the country, were already planning his downfall. As Burkina Faso began to change under Sankara's leadership, his enemies grew more desperate. He was proving that Africa could stand on its own, and that was dangerous to those who benefited from Africa's dependence. But before we get to his death, we must understand the revolution he built. When Thomas Sankara took power on August 4, 1983, Burkina Faso was one of the poorest countries in the world. The land was dry, resources were controlled by foreign companies, the people were uneducated, and the country was heavily dependent on foreign aid. For decades, it had been a country ruled by leaders who took orders from France, its former colonial master. Sankara had no interest in following the same path. From the moment he became president, he made it clear that Burkina Faso would no longer be a country controlled by outside forces. His revolution was not just about changing policies, it was about transforming the entire mindset of the people. He wanted Burkinabés to believe in themselves, to understand that they did not need Europe or the West to survive, and that everything they needed could be built with their own hands. One of Sankara's first and most radical decisions was rejecting foreign aid. At a time when most African countries relied heavily on loans from the IMF and World Bank, this was unheard of. But Sankara saw these institutions for what they were, tools of economic control. He argued that accepting loans from these organizations meant falling into a cycle of debt that would never end. Instead of taking foreign money, he focused on mobilizing Burkina Faso's resources. To break free from economic dependence, he launched a self-sufficiency program in agriculture. He called on Burkinabés to grow their food, emphasizing that a country that cannot feed itself is not truly independent. Within 4 years, the results were astonishing. Grain production doubled, making Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food for the first time in its history. But agriculture was not the only sector he transformed. He nationalized Burkina Faso's natural resources, particularly its gold and minerals, which had long been exploited by foreign companies. Instead of allowing foreign investors to take the profits, Sankara made sure that the wealth of the country stayed in the country. His policies weren't just about economic independence. They were also about dignity. He famously said, "He who feeds you controls you." He wanted to ensure that no Western country could use food aid or economic assistance as a tool to manipulate Burkina Faso's future. Sankara understood that real change had to go beyond economics. He wanted to build a society where every Burkinabe had access to education, healthcare, and basic human rights. In just 4 years, he launched some of the most ambitious social programs Africa had ever seen. He prioritized education by launching a massive literacy campaign. When he took office, over 80% of Burkinabés could not read or write. He deployed thousands of teachers across the country and built new schools, and within a few years, the literacy rate had dramatically improved. Education was no longer a privilege for the elite, it was a right for every child. Healthcare also became a national priority. Before Sankara, thousands of children in Burkina Faso died every year from preventable diseases like measles, meningitis, and polio. In response, he launched a nationwide vaccination program that immunized over 2.5 million children in just a few weeks. This was one of the most successful public health campaigns in African history at the time. Women's rights were another area where Sankara broke from tradition. He believed that a country could never be truly free if half of its population was oppressed. In Burkina Faso, women had long been marginalized, forced into child marriages, and subjected to harmful practices like female genital mutilation. Sankara took bold steps to ban forced marriages, polygamy, and female genital mutilation. He also gave women prominent roles in government and encouraged them to join the military, something that was unheard of in many African nations at the time. His belief in gender equality wasn't just rhetoric, he led by example. While most African leaders surrounded themselves with male advisors, Sankara appointed women to key government positions. He wanted to show that women were not just caretakers, they were leaders. Apart from that, Burkina Faso's land has suffered from years of deforestation and desertification. The once fertile soil was turning to dust, and climate change was making agriculture even more difficult. Sankara saw this as a direct threat to his vision of self-sufficiency. If Burkina Faso could not produce its food, the country would once again become dependent on foreign aid. To combat this crisis, he launched one of the largest reforestation projects in African history. He organized the planting of over 10 million trees across the country, reversing decades of environmental destruction. He introduced strict regulations on deforestation and encouraged communities to take responsibility for preserving their land. This was revolutionary for the time. While most African leaders focused on short-term economic gains, Sankara was thinking about the future. He understood that true independence was not just about political sovereignty, it was about ensuring that future generations would have the resources they needed to survive. By 1987, Thomas Sankara had become more than just the president of Burkina Faso. He was a symbol of African self-reliance, a leader who had broken free from Western control, and a man who proved that a nation could thrive without begging foreign powers for survival. But power is dangerous when it threatens the global order. Sankara's enemies weren't just inside Burkina Faso, they were watching from Paris, from Washington, from Abidjan. His revolution had made too many people uncomfortable. It was only a matter of time before they decided to put an end to it. Not everyone in Burkina Faso embraced Sankara's radical vision. The rich, the elite, and the traditional ruling class saw him as a direct threat to their power. Under previous governments, these groups had been the main beneficiaries of foreign aid, foreign business deals, and a system that kept them wealthy while ordinary Burkinabés suffered. But under Sankara, all of that had changed. The ruling families no longer controlled land. The land was given to the farmers. Government officials were stripped of luxuries, and foreign companies were cut off from exploiting Burkina Faso's resources. More importantly, Sankara had made a dangerous enemy, his second-in-command, Blaise Compaoré. Compaoré had once been Sankara's closest ally. They had fought together, planned the revolution together, and overthrew the old regime side by side. But by 1987, something had changed. Compaoré, unlike Sankara, believed that Burkina Faso needed foreign alliances. He was not opposed to accepting aid, working with France, or opening the country back up to outside investors. Sankara, however, refused. He believed that the moment Burkina Faso allowed foreign money to dictate its future, it would once again fall under Western control. This ideological split between the two men grew into personal tension. In the months leading up to Sankara's death, Compaoré became more distant. He stopped attending meetings. He criticized Sankara's policies in private, and he began meeting with people who had every reason to want Sankara dead. Sankara had made it clear that Burkina Faso was no longer under French influence, and that alone made him an enemy of the French government. At the time, France still controlled much of West Africa through a system known as France-Afrique, a network of economic and political influence that allowed France to maintain control over its former colonies. Most African leaders accepted this system, knowing that resisting it would come at a cost. But Sankara did not accept it. He openly attacked France's role in Africa, calling it a system of modern colonialism. He rejected the CFA franc, the currency controlled by France that most West African nations still used. He called out African leaders who were loyal to France, including Houphouët-Boigny, the president of Côte d'Ivoire, one of France's most trusted allies in Africa. Houphouët-Boigny saw Sankara as a problem. If Burkina Faso could break free, what stopped other African nations from doing the same? If Sankara succeeded, his revolution could spread, and France's influence in West Africa would collapse. So they decided to act. According to multiple sources, in the months before Sankara's assassination, meetings were held between the French government, Côte d'Ivoire, and key figures inside Burkina Faso, including Blaise Compaoré. The goal was simple: remove Sankara and restore Burkina Faso to a leader who would cooperate with the West. On the day of his assassination, Sankara was attending a meeting at the National Council of the Revolution headquarters in Ouagadougou. As always, he arrived without bodyguards. He never carried weapons, believing that his greatest protection was his people. But on that day, his people were not there to protect him. At around 4:30 p.m., a group of armed soldiers, men loyal to Compaoré, stormed the building. Sankara and 12 of his closest allies were trapped inside. Gunfire erupted. The attack lasted less than 5 minutes. Sankara was shot 4 times in the chest. He died instantly. His body, along with those of his comrades, was taken away and buried in an unmarked grave. There was no funeral, no official announcement, no chance for his supporters to mourn.
Et les gens étaient battus. Tout le monde. On était sidérés, dépassés, meurtris au fond de nous-mêmes. Et ça nous a tués au fond de notre âme.
That same night, Blaise Compaoré declared himself the new leader of Burkina Faso. His first statement, that Sankara had died in a coup attempt. But everyone knew the truth. The Burkina Faso that Sankara had built was dismantled almost overnight. All of his revolutionary programs were reversed. The night Thomas Sankara was assassinated, his killers believed they had ended his story. His body was buried in an unmarked grave. His name was banned from public mention, and a new government was installed to erase everything he had built. But Sankara was never just a man. He was an idea. And no bullet, no coup, no foreign-backed conspiracy could bury that idea forever. By the early 2010s, Sankara had become more than just a national figure. He was a Pan-African legend. Activists across Africa, from Mali to Nigeria to South Africa, began quoting him in their speeches. His words became rallying cries against foreign exploitation, and his face appeared on protest banners from Dakar to Johannesburg. The more the Burkinabe government tried to erase him, the more powerful his legacy became. For 27 years, Blaise Compaoré ruled Burkina Faso with an iron grip. He silenced opposition, controlled the media, and ensured that his power remained unchallenged. But even the strongest walls eventually cracked. In 2014, after years of growing discontent, the people of Burkina Faso finally rose. When Compaoré attempted to change the constitution to extend his rule, hundreds of thousands of Burkinabés took to the streets in a massive uprising. Protesters stormed the National Assembly, forcing Compaoré to flee the country. The revolution was successful. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, Burkina Faso was free from his rule. And what name did the people chant in the streets as they celebrated? Thomas Sankara. His spirit had never left Burkina Faso, and when the people finally reclaimed their country, they did so in his name. With Compaoré gone, the demand for justice grew louder. For decades, the truth about Sankara's murder had been hidden, but now, the people wanted answers. In 2021, after years of investigation, a trial was finally held. The evidence was overwhelming. The court ruled that Blaise Compaoré had been directly involved in planning Sankara's assassination, and in 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison. Several of his top military officers were also convicted. But the trial did more than just punish those responsible. It officially confirmed what the people had long suspected. Sankara had been killed, not because he was corrupt or dangerous, but because he had dared to challenge the global system that kept Africa weak. In 2023, another symbolic event took place. Sankara's remains, which had been buried in an unmarked grave for decades, were finally given a proper burial. The new government organized a ceremony honoring him as a national hero. His reburial was not just about correcting a historical wrong. It was about acknowledging that Burkina Faso had come full circle. The people had reclaimed their leader, and his dream of an independent Burkina Faso was once again being pursued. In 2022, another major shift took place in Burkina Faso. A young army captain, Ibrahim Traoré, took power after leading a coup. Unlike Compaoré and the leaders before him, Traoré's message was clear. Burkina Faso must reclaim its sovereignty. He immediately expelled French military forces, cut ties with Western governments trying to control Burkina Faso's policies, and began forming alliances with other independent African nations. His speeches sounded eerily familiar because they echoed the words of Thomas Sankara. For many Burkinabés, Traoré represents a continuation of Sankara's vision. He has positioned himself as a defender of Burkina Faso's independence, rejecting foreign intervention and calling on the people to take control of their destiny. While it is too early to say whether Traoré will fully live up to Sankara's ideals, one thing is certain: Burkina Faso is once again on the path of resistance, defiance, and self-reliance. And today, Sankara is more alive than ever.
Sankara, Sankara, mon président. Sankara, Sankara du Burkina. Il est venu en nous m'intègre pour bâtir une Afrique digne. Sankara, Sankara, Sankara.
Do you think they can end the vision of Thomas Sankara? Is Traoré his reincarnation? Let us know in the comment section. Can anyone end him after the legacy he left? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.